This is a true story documented in historical records, medical journals, and the terrified testimonies of those who walked the halls of the damned. It is a narrative of pestilence, of desperate science, and of a suffering so profound that it stained the very limestone foundation of the earth. Welcome to Nocturnal Ledger. To understand the horror of Waverly Hills Sanatorium, you must first understand the color of death in the early 20th century. It was not the black of night nor the gray of decay. It was white. The White Plague. Tuberculosis was a predator that did not discriminate. It consumed the lungs of the wealthy and the poor alike, drowning them in their own fluids, racking their bodies with coughing fits that could snap ribs, and leaving them pale, skeletal husks of their former selves. In the early 1900s, in the humid River Valley air of Louisville, Kentucky, this plague was rampant. The city was drowning in disease. The hospitals were overflowing, and the graveyards were struggling to keep pace with the harvest. In 1910, a decision was made to isolate the infected. They needed a place away from the general population, a place where the sick could rest, or more accurately, where the sick could wait to die without infecting the healthy. They chose a windswept hill, the highest point in Jefferson County. It was a place that had once been a family home, a quiet estate named Waverly Hill. But the tranquility of that name would soon be obliterated by the screams of the dying. The original structure was a wooden two-story pavilion opened in July of 1910. It was intended to house 40 to 50 patients. But the White Plague was voracious. Within years, the wooden walls were bursting with the infected. The city needed a fortress against death. They needed a monument to containment. And so, in 1924, the construction of the massive 5-story Gothic revival structure that stands today began. It opened in 1926, a behemoth of brick and concrete designed to house over 400 patients, though at the height of the epidemic, it often crammed in hundreds more. The architecture itself was designed with a specific, chilling purpose. It was built in a batwing formation to channel the fresh air through the halls. The medical theory of the time believed that fresh air, sunshine, and high-caloric diets were the only cure for tuberculosis. Antibiotics like streptomycin were decades away. The doctors were fighting a war with sticks and stones. And because of this, the treatment was often as brutal as the disease. This is where the haunting begins. Not in the paranormal investigations of the modern era, but in the medical realities of 1926. Imagine the winter in Kentucky. The wind howling up that hill, temperatures plunging below freezing. Yet the doctors ordered the patients to sit outside on the solariums, wrapped in electric blankets, breathing in the frigid air. Snow would drift onto their beds. They lay there, row upon row of the dying, their lungs freezing, hoping that the cold would kill the bacteria before the pneumonia killed them. When fresh air failed, the doctors turned to surgery. These procedures, documented in the grim ledgers of the hospital, read like the itinerary of a torture chamber. There was the pneumothorax, where doctors would intentionally collapse a lung to give it a rest, inserting needles and pumping air into the chest cavity. There was the thoracoplasty, a procedure of last resort that is difficult to even describe without wincing. To collapse the lung permanently, surgeons would open the chest and remove the ribs. Not one or two, but sometimes 7 or 8 ribs were excised from the patient's body. The chest would cave in, leaving the patient permanently disfigured, struggling to breathe with half a rib cage. This was done without the sophisticated anesthesia and pain management we have today. The agony echoed off the tiled walls. It soaked into the floors. It is said that tens of thousands of people died at Waverly Hills. While the inflated number of 63,000 is likely a myth, verified records suggest that at least 6,000 to 8,000 souls departed their bodies within those walls. That is 8,000 tragic endings concentrated in one single building. The sheer volume of death created a logistical nightmare. The doctors and administrators faced a psychological problem. If the patients, who were already fighting a losing battle against despair, saw hearses pulling up to the front entrance every hour, if they saw bodies being wheeled out the front doors constantly, hope would vanish. And without hope, the immune system collapses. To maintain the illusion of survival, the administration utilized a tunnel. This is the infamous body chute. Carved 500 feet through the side of the hill, this concrete tunnel was originally designed to transport coal and supplies from the railroad tracks at the bottom of the hill up to the heating plant. It was a steep, damp, echoing corridor. But soon, it found a darker purpose. When a patient died, usually in the darkest hours of the night, the staff would not wheel them out the main corridors. They would take the gurney to a service entrance, load the body onto a motorized rail cart, and send it down the tunnel. Imagine the sound of that cart, the metal wheels grinding against the tracks, echoing in the enclosed concrete tube. The body, wrapped in a sheet, descending 500 feet into the darkness, waiting for a hearse at the bottom of the hill to whisk it away, unseen. The tunnel was a one-way artery for the dead. Witnesses who have ventured into that tunnel today report a suffocating heaviness. It is not just the dampness of the earth. It is an oppressive weight, a feeling of being watched from the shadows. The air is always colder inside the chute. Electronic voice phenomena, or EVPs, captured in the tunnel often record the sounds of footsteps, the rattle of chains, and sometimes faint, breathy voices pleading for help. It is a place where the energy of thousands of passing souls seems to have pooled, like stagnant water. But if the tunnel is the artery of death, the fifth floor is the brain of the haunting. Specifically, room 502. The fifth floor was reserved for the mentally unstable tuberculosis patients. These were the poor souls suffering from the hypoxia of the disease, which starved the brain of oxygen, causing hallucinations and psychosis. They were isolated even from the other isolated patients. In this realm of madness, two tragedies occurred that have become the cornerstone of the Waverly legend. The historical record tells us of a head nurse in 1928. She was unmarried, a woman dedicated to her profession, or so it seemed. But secrets fester in isolation. It is believed she entered a relationship with one of the doctors, a relationship that resulted in a pregnancy. In 1928, in a religious and conservative Kentucky, an unwed pregnancy was a social death sentence. Whether driven by the shame, the depression of the environment, or perhaps the influence of the suffering around her, she walked into room 502. She did not leave alive. She was found hanging from the light fixture or the exposed plumbing. The records are sparse, hushed up to avoid scandal, but the psychic scar remains. 4 years later, in 1932, another nurse assigned to room 502 met a violent end. She did not hang herself. She walked out onto the roof patio, the very place where patients were wheeled out for fresh air, and she plunged several stories to her death. The official story was suicide, but whispers among the staff suggested she may have been pushed. Pushed by what? A lover? A patient? Or a force that had begun to manifest in the hospital? Visitors to room 502 today report immediate physical sensations. A feeling of nausea is common. Women in particular report a sensation of dizziness or a sudden, unexplained emotional crash, a feeling of profound sorrow that is not their own. Photographs taken in this room often reveal orbs and anomalies. One famous image appears to show a spectral figure standing in the window, looking out over the grounds, forever trapped in her final moment of decision. The sanatorium closed as a TB hospital in 1961 after the antibiotic streptomycin rendered the facility obsolete. But the suffering did not end. It reopened a year later as Woodhaven Medical Services, a geriatric hospital. This era, lasting until 1981, introduced a new layer of tragedy. Allegations of patient neglect were rampant. The elderly, suffering from dementia and mobility issues, were reportedly treated with disdain. Rumors of electroshock therapy and abuse circulated. When the state of Kentucky finally shut down Woodhaven in the early 80s, the building was left to rot. For decades, Waverly Hills stood abandoned. It became a magnet for vandals, thrill-seekers, and homeless drifters. The windows were smashed, the equipment stolen, the walls covered in graffiti. But those who broke in often came running out. They reported sounds that made no sense in an empty building. The slamming of heavy doors, the smell of fresh-baked bread in the kitchen, followed instantly by the smell of rotting flesh. The sound of footsteps following them down the long, debris-strewn corridors. It was during this period of abandonment that the legend of the creeper began to surface. This is not the spirit of a patient or a doctor. This is something else. Witnesses describe a shadow figure, darker than the surrounding night, that crawls along the floors and walls. It does not move like a human. It scuttles, its limbs moving with unnatural spider-like jerks. It is often seen on the third and fourth floors. Paranormal investigators speculate that the immense amount of pain and death at Waverly may have acted as a beacon, attracting a non-human entity, something ancient and predatory that feeds on the residual misery. When the creeper is present, the temperature drops drastically. Batteries drain instantly. A primal fear, a fight-or-flight response hardwired into our DNA, kicks in. Let us delve into the specific, documented encounters that defy scientific explanation. Consider the case of the little boy, often called Timmy. He is seen playing with a leather ball in the hallways. He appears solid, a child of about 6 or 7, often wearing period clothing from the 1920s. Investigators have rolled balls down the hallway, asking Timmy to play. On video, in empty corridors with no drafts, the balls have been recorded stopping, changing direction, and rolling back toward the investigator. This is not a violent haunting. It is a heartbreaking echo of a childhood stolen by disease. Then there's the apparition of the man in the white coat. He is often seen in the kitchen area and the operating rooms. Witnesses describe the scent of old antiseptic and copper, the smell of blood, accompanying his appearance. Is he a doctor, eternally making his rounds, trying to save patients who are long dead? Or is he a darker reflection of the surgeries performed there? We must also consider the stone tape theory in relation to Waverly Hills. The theory suggests that emotional trauma can be recorded onto the physical environment, particularly in minerals like limestone and quartz. Waverly Hills sits on a massive limestone deposit. The walls are brick and concrete. Could the sheer intensity of the suffering, the gasping for breath, the fear of the dark tunnel, the grief of the nurses have been imprinted onto the building itself? When we hear the disembodied screams or the phantom coughing fits that visitors report, are we interacting with conscious spirits, or are we simply playing back a recording of history? Skeptics argue that the experiences are psychosomatic. They say that the building is creepy, therefore people expect to be scared. They cite infrasound, low-frequency sound waves caused by the wind rushing through the batwing architecture, as a cause for the feelings of dread and hallucinations. And indeed, the wind at Waverly is a character in itself. It moans through the broken windows, creating a symphony of dissonance. However, the physical evidence is harder to dismiss. In the early 2000s, during a televised investigation, a thermal imaging camera captured a heat signature on the 4th floor. It was the distinct shape of a small child, radiating heat in a building that had no electricity and had been abandoned for 20 years. As the investigators watched, the heat signature walked behind a pillar and vanished. The temperature of the spot where the figure had stood was measured seconds later. It was freezing. The heat had not dissipated naturally. It had simply ceased to exist. There are also the physical attacks. Visitors have left Waverly with scratches, distinct red welts in sets of 3, appearing on their backs and arms. These scratches often burn, and they appear in places the person could not reach themselves. This phenomenon usually occurs near the body chute or on the 4th floor. It suggests an intelligence that is not just residual, but active and aggressive. The isolation rooms offer another layer of terror. These small, tiled cells were where patients were put when they were misbehaving or delirious. Standing in one of these rooms today, with the heavy door standing ajar, one feels an intense claustrophobia. The acoustics are strange. Sound is deadened. People report feeling invisible hands touching their hair or grabbing their wrists. One former tour guide reported being shoved violently by unseen hands while locking up the facility alone at night. He refused to ever return to the 3rd floor alone. The elevator shaft is another focal point. The elevators have long since been removed, leaving gaping maws in the center of the building. It was here that the bodies of 2 homeless men were found years after the hospital closed. They had been murdered, their bodies dumped into the shaft. This modern violence layers upon the historical trauma. It is said that if you shine a flashlight into the shaft, the beam is sometimes swallowed by a darkness that light cannot penetrate, a supernatural void. But perhaps the most chilling aspect of Waverly Hills is not the ghosts, but the realization of what life was like for the patients. They were exiles. They were sent to the top of a hill to look down on the lights of Louisville, the city of the living, knowing they would likely never return to it. They formed a community of the damned. They fell in love, they threw parties, they tried to live while their bodies decayed. This intense desire to live, clashing with the inevitability of death, created an energy storm that has never dissipated. When you walk the halls today, the paint is peeling in great leaden sheets. The rust creeps like a fungus over the metal doorframes. The silence is heavy, but if you stop and listen, really listen, beneath the sound of the wind, you can hear them. The squeak of the gurney wheels, the rhythmic coughing, the soft, shuffling footsteps of a nurse making her eternal rounds. The haunting of Waverly Hills is not just about jump scares or shadowy figures. It is a testament to the endurance of human suffering. It is a place where the veil between our world and the next has been worn thin by the friction of thousands of passing souls. It challenges our understanding of reality. If energy cannot be created or destroyed, then where did the energy of 60,000 years of combined life force go when it was extinguished in those halls? It didn't leave. It stayed. It seeped into the concrete. It waits in the tunnel. As we conclude this examination of the darkness, we are left with more questions than answers. The files in the medical archives tell us the names of the dead. The death certificates list the causes: tuberculosis, pneumonia, suicide. But they do not list what happened after the heart stopped beating. Waverly Hills stands today as a monument to a battle lost. The White Plague was eventually defeated by science, but the battlefield remains, scarred and active. The entities that roam the 4th floor, the shadows that inhabit the body chute, the nurse in room 502. They are the nocturnal ledger of a debt that can never be paid. They are the reminders that some places are not just buildings. They are containers for things that should have passed on, but couldn't. Does the consciousness survive the death of the body? And if it does, why does it stay in the place of its greatest pain? Perhaps they are waiting for a cure that will never come. Or perhaps they are warning us that the line between the living and the dead is not a wall, but a curtain, blowing in the wind of a dark, cold hill in Kentucky. This has been a file from the Nocturnal Ledger. Sleep well if you can.